Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. A very happy Thursday to you if it's Thursday. If it's Friday morning where you are, good morning all over the East. And welcome. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we've got 2 hours. We're going to clear the mailbags. Every now and then we do this internet open forum, and Jimmy answers all the questions that come through us through the various forums, written forums where people can send questions. So I won't be giving out the phone number. Well, actually, the truth is I probably will be giving out the phone number, but when I do, it'll be a mistake. And Sarah will give me the look, and I'll just sheepishly go on with the program. Jimmy Akin is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Cy Kellett.
Thank you for being here with us for an internet open forum.
Always happy to do it.
We still have not exhausted the internet's ability to produce questions. We have not gotten to the end of the internet.
They used to have signs.
Yeah, that was.
It's like you've gotten to the end of the internet. You may now go outside and play.
Yeah, I actually never came to one of those, but I heard that people came to those. And it's a good reminder because you can get a little bit lost there in the internet world. Almost gave out the number. Sarah. Okay, thank you. Keep giving me the look. All right, we got a whole bunch of questions, Jimmy, but tomorrow is Friday, and that means a new Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What's going to happen on the Mysterious World tomorrow?
We're going to be telling people about Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a plan that was developed in 1962 by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to help get us into a war with Cuba. And to help get us into a war with Cuba, the plan was to frame Cuba for aggressive actions against the United States and other countries. And as part of this, they would be conducting potentially terrorist attacks on American soil and maybe killing people.
This is so outrageous, but this is one of those things where it's hidden away until the files are opened decades later. Right. So
yes. Yeah. The file on Operation Northwoods was declassified in the 1990s. And so this is real. This is an actual plan the Joint Chiefs proposed that President John F. Kennedy said no to.
Oh, I'm so glad there's somebody who was the no person who's like, no, we're not doing that. That's you need that. I'm glad that there's a hero to the story. But it's frightening to think that people thought, this seems like a reasonable plan. People who were in positions of authority thought, this seems like a reasonable plan. We'll just frame Cuba for some murders.
Well, they felt under a deadline because Cuba had not yet fallen into the Soviet orbit, and it was in the process of doing so. And they said, this is going to be much harder to deal with if we let Cuba become a Soviet bloc nation.
Oh, yeah.
And so we need to take action before that happens because they could do things like stage nuclear missiles there, which they then did later in the same year. So there was some urgency to the situation, but I'm glad we didn't have U.S.-sponsored false flag terrorist attacks on American soil in 1962.
Yeah, right. It seems to me, though, that we have this just war theory. And a lot of times when you hear people talk about war, the way they talk about it actually draws on classical Catholic just war theory. But it does seem to me that there's been this long debate, and we still don't have an answer to it. Maybe you have a moral answer to it about what is one country's obligation when another country, is essentially in a state of slavery to tyrants who are cruel and even murderous tyrants, like the Castros have been in Cuba. Like, does just war theory account for that?
I think it does in principle, or at least an extension of it can, because you have the same thing happening on a smaller scale. Just war is essentially a magnification of the self-defense principle that applies to each of us as individuals, where if someone attacks you and there's no way to save yourself or your family other than using lethal force, it's moral to use lethal force. And the same thing applies when you scale it up to nations. Well, so let's go back to the small scale. Suppose there was a group of people that were human trafficking and had enslaved some people and were abusing them and gravely violating their rights. Well, law enforcement could come in that situation and break up the human trafficking ring. And so in principle, the same thing could happen on the nation state scale, but there would be problems about exactly how do you adjudicate that in the international environment. But in principle, it could work.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, I do think often there is a good impulse under some of the, I mean, the war thing, you really want to, I think there's a general consensus against war, and I don't want to be on the wrong side of that, but like some governments really are evil, and they really do need that needs to be addressed. Like it was a great day when Idi Amin left Uganda. That was a great day. So.
Yeah.
And people need to be.
On the other hand, some of the bad governments also have nuclear weapons, which makes the situation much more complex.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and when that's right. It's very complex. Not an easy one. I wish we would talk more, though. I'm glad we had this conversation because I do think Catholics need to talk more about just war theory because it's really very enlightening that there's this whole body of thought that some great people like St. Augustine, for example, have given us to help us think through these difficult problems. I'm ready to go to questions. You ready to go to questions?
Oh, sure.
All right. Well, I'm not going to the phones. I'm just going to read what Gerardo said. Here's Gerardo's question. Thank you for the question, Gerardo. My question is in regard to the need of the body during the second coming. Why do we require our body then? Will we be living on earth? Will our resurrected bodies ascend to heaven? If we ascend to heaven, then why do we need a body? What is the purpose of a resurrected body in heaven?
So it's very common for people to talk about humans going to heaven when they die. And it's easy for people to think of that as a permanent state, that like our final destiny is in heaven rather than on the earth. But that's not actually what the Bible teaches or what the church teaches. Going to heaven, so to speak, is a purely temporary thing that happens between death and resurrection. Now, the reason we need our body is because God designed us not to be simply spiritual beings. He also designed us to be physical beings. So we're a combination of the two. In order to be a complete human being, you need both a body and a soul. And so we're different than the angels. Angels are purely spiritual. They don't have bodies. They're not designed to have bodies, but humans are. And so the human destiny is to be like what God designed us to be an embodied spirit. And so that's why we need our bodies back eventually, and why God will ultimately give us our bodies back, because that's the way he designed human nature, to include both things. Now, in terms of where we'll be after we get our bodies back, Scripture presents us as living on what's called the new earth. The new earth appears to be a renovated, improved, upgraded version of this earth. So at some point at the second coming, God will upgrade the world. It will be a much better place. And the book of Revelation, which gives us a glimpse, at least hints at what the new earth is going to be like, it indicates we'll be in full spiritual union with God. The heavenly city, New Jerusalem, descends out of heaven and lands on earth. And this is not meant to be taken literally, but it's a sign of the union spiritually between heaven and earth. So we won't have the kind of spiritual separation from God that we have now. Instead, we'll be living lives on the new earth, in our bodies, doing stuff, but also in full spiritual union with God.
That's the good news, Gerardo. Thank you very, very much for the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's an internet open forum today, clearing the mailbags out. And so we just sit back, relax, and enjoy the questions and the answers from Jimmy Akin. The 20 Answers Summer Reading Challenge continues, and we started it early. It's now been explained to me. It's the Summer Reading Challenge in that the challenge is to read all 44 books in the 20 Answers series by the end of summer. And so you get 70% off the set right now. 44 books in our 20 Answers series, 20 answers on all kinds of topics related to the Catholic faith. And you can get it at 70% off at shop.catholic.com.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back. Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Hey, it's Wednesday, and that means a new episode of our podcast, Catholic Answers Focus, has dropped. You can check it out at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Catholic Answers Focus, the world's premier podcast on Catholic apologetics, now available every Wednesday at CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
Unplanned, the true story of Abby Johnson.
I would be the youngest director in Planned Parenthood history.
She believed in a woman's right to choose.
I've had an abortion myself, so I don't have any problem with another woman making the same decision.
Until the day she saw something that changed everything.
Tiny, perfect little baby. And then it was just gone.
Now she's pulling back the curtain on the abortion industry. Unplanned.
Available at EWTNRC.com and the EWTN app.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest. And we've got a whole bunch of questions from the internet for Jimmy. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and has written a whole bunch of books, including his most recent book, The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It. You can find all of Jimmy's books over at shop.catholic.com. Well, I don't even know if I'm telling the truth. Are all of your books over there, or do you write books that go other places?
I have a few things other places too.
Oh, yeah. All right. Let's give you Antonella's question. Is it possible to trace an individual bishop today back to one of the 12? In an era of ancestry passion, it would be great to be able to find our Catholic ancestry. Thank you, and God bless you, Antonella. Well, God bless you too, Antonella.
So we do know that the bishops that are ordained today do have lines of ordination that stretch back to the original apostles. That's not in doubt. That's something that we can show a variety of ways. But it gets a little harder if you're trying to trace a particular bishop's lineage all the way back to the apostles, because not every record from the past has survived. In fact, in various places, the records only go back so far. This is because, for example, in Europe, the climate is wet. And as a result, lots of records that are, say, kept on parchment or papyrus would decay over time. They'd either become illegible, or they'd rot, or they might be destroyed in fire or lost in war or things like that. And so that's why from Europe, we don't tend to have records that go back beyond a certain point. That's one of the reasons that when you do find ancient papyrus documents and so forth, they're often in dry climates like in Egypt. Or down near the Dead Sea, where we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that dryness enables the records to survive for much longer. But with the Catholic bishops in Europe, for example, we just don't have records past a certain point because they've been destroyed or lost. We do have records that go back centuries, though, and it is possible to trace the lineage of particular bishops going back in time. There's a website, actually. I believe it's Catholic-hierarchy.org, where you can look up a bishop. And it tries to cover all the bishops in the world today, but you look up a given Catholic bishop and you can trace his ordination lineage back multiple centuries. And you can see exactly who ordained who and on what date. And it's fascinating to look at that. Beyond the document horizon, we could call it, we know that there were these lineages going even further back, and we can conjecturally reconstruct what they would have been. You know, if a bishop is in Paris, let's say, he would have been ordained by a previous bishop of Paris in all likelihood, or by, rather, I should say, other bishops in that area. So we could get a sense of who likely ordained who even before the advent of documents, but that involves more conjectural work. What we can say is that the lineages are secure because one of the principles that goes way back in church history is having multiple bishops consecrate a new one. The goal is like at least 3. And so that way, even if there was a problem with one of the bishops doing the consecration, the other bishops would make sure that the new consecration was valid. So this is a form of what's known as error correction. You know, if you if you have files that you're trying to transmit, let's say over the internet, well, there's a possibility a given file might become corrupted. So you have error protection, error correction methods to adjust for that and make sure that the file goes through properly. The same thing applies with ordinations. Even though a single bishop might, for one reason or another, not be doing an ordination or a consecration validly, the other bishops involved will be. So you have multiple redundancies as an error correction feature to ensure the proper transmission of holy orders.
So that's why the 3 bishops at an ordination of a bishop. That's interesting, because there's always one guy who's like the main consecrator, but then you have the other 2 lay their hands just to we're not going to play around with this apostolic succession thing.
Right, it's a serious thing.
Hey, well, thank you very much, Antonella, for the blessings and for the question. Question next for Jimmy Akin from Lawton. I was doing some research and I came across questions about the Exodus. 1, people. Do you want me to give them to you all at once, Jimmy?
No, there are several here, and these are essentially objections that he's run across to the idea of the historical Exodus in the Bible.
Okay,
so why don't we take them one at a time?
Okay, people argue Canaan was occupied by Egyptians. Wouldn't that have invalidated the story?
No. So the Egyptian Empire went through a number of different phases, and the phase during which the Exodus occurred is a period known as the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom was it started about 1550 BC. Before that, there was a more chaotic time called the Second Intermediate Period, when Egypt had basically fallen apart and it was not a single united government, and you had different people ruling in different parts of it. But then, and so obviously during a chaotic period, like an intermediate period, like the Second Intermediate Period, Egypt is not united, it's in a chaotic state, and so it's not going to be able to project power and occupy other locations. Then the Egyptians at the end of the Second Intermediate Period get their act together, they reunite the country, and we have 3 dynasties, the 18th, 19th, and 20th, that rule, but they go through ups and downs too. The 18th dynasty had an expansionist period where they did occupy Canaan to some degree. They didn't fully occupy it. It wasn't totally under their control, but they would go over there and beat up the Canaanite kings and exact tribute from them, and then haul the tribute back to Egypt. That was one of your key jobs if you were Pharaoh. It was to go beat up other people and take their stuff. And so the 18th century pharaohs were fairly successful at doing that. But then we get into the 19th dynasty. And the 19th dynasty had one of the greatest pharaohs of all time. His name was Ramesses II. And he reigned for a very, very long period of time in the 1200s BC, multiple decades. And he's the pharaoh that most scholars think the Exodus occurred under. Well, the thing is, when the Egyptians had a pharaoh who reigned for a very long time, it usually didn't go that well for them, because as Pharaoh gets older, he's not as physically able to go beat people up and take their stuff. Oh, yeah. And so he's going to be getting weaker over time. Now, they had a special ceremony to try to help the pharaoh retain his youth. It was called the Hebsed Festival, and it would occur like on the 30th anniversary of Pharaoh's reign and then periodically thereafter. And the pharaoh would do things to magically rejuvenate himself, like run a race course and wrestle with younger men and things like that. And this was supposed to restore the pharaoh's vitality, but like a lot of folk magic remedies, didn't really work. And so as a result, when you had a pharaoh that reigned for a really long time, the empire tended to lose its ability to project force into other territories. And so it looks like what happened is as Ramesses II aged, he got weaker, as you would expect, and the Israelites were able to escape and leave and occupy start moving in to the Promised Land, where the Egyptians were now having trouble projecting force. And we see some evidence for that in the reign of Ramesses II's son, Merneptah. Because Merneptah, he's a younger guy now, at least somewhat younger than his father. And when he comes to the throne, he does start to try to go back over into Canaan and start taking the stuff. And he had some military victories there that he recorded on a monument known as the Merneptah Stela. And he mentions Israel as being there at that point. But one of the interesting things about the Egyptian writing system is they have these little symbols that they'll put after a word to tell you what kind of class of objects it goes into. These are called classifiers. They're also sometimes called determinatives. Like, for example, if you have the most famous one is the cartouche. It's that oval that you see around the names of pharaohs.
Oh, yeah.
That's a determinative. It tells you that it's a pharaoh here. And what that circle's supposed to do is a magic circle that protects the pharaoh by surrounding him magically. And there are other determinatives too. My favorite is called the evil bird, and it's a little bitty bird. It looks kind of like a sparrow, and when it's put after a word in Egyptian, it indicates that whatever the word refers to is bad, weak, evil, or annoying. But there's also a sign for like city or country, and those will get put after people who have cities and countries. But when it comes to the reference to Israel on the Merneptah Stela, it uses a different classifier, a different determinative that signifies a people, but not one that has a city yet or a country yet. And so it looks like he may have had military engagement with the Israelites when they were still semi-nomadic before they had fully settled in the land. So that's additional evidence pointing to an exodus during the reign of Ramesses II.
All right, then a second objection from our, let me just make sure, Lawton, from our listener Lawton. There are no artifacts from their 40-year journey, the Israelites' 40-year journey.
Well, we have the Merneptah Stela. That might have been written during the 40-year journey. But also think about it. I mean, they're crossing the desert in the Sinai Peninsula. What are you going to find that you're going to be able to identify as theirs? Now, number one, the Sinai Peninsula has not been excavated. It is a big desert wasteland, and not much of it has been excavated. So there could be all kinds of artifacts there that we have no clue about. But second, you got to say, well, okay, what would we find that could survive from that period? Let's say someone lost a sandal. Well, how likely is it that a sandal is going to survive for 3,200 years? Exposed to the weather? It could easily be destroyed. Or someone lost a wooden bowl or a clay pot. Well, it's likely to get smashed or otherwise destroyed. And then, even if it survived the ages, how would you know this is an Israelite artifact? And because they'd just been living in Egypt, a lot of their artifacts would look Egyptian. They'd have Egyptian pottery styles and things. So how would you even know whose artifact this was? So we really wouldn't expect to find artifacts that are identifiable and have survived the ages in the currently unexcavated Sinai Peninsula.
All right, a third objection then. The Egyptians were not big on slaves.
This is flat wrong. The Egyptians were very big on slaves. That was one of the things that was part of Pharaoh's job. If his job is to go beat people up and take their stuff, that included taking slaves. And so pharaohs would do things like go into other lands and take a bunch of captive slaves and bring them back to Egypt. And we have evidence of something like that happening at the end of the Second Intermediate Period. Now, the second intermediate period, remember, was when Egypt had fallen apart, and in the north, there was a group of rulers who were known as the Hyksos. And the Hyksos were not native Egyptians. They were Canaanites, they were Semites that had come in from elsewhere and taken over northern Egypt. And the evidence that we have suggests that Joseph became the vizier of one of the Hyksos pharaohs. And then when the new kingdom begins and the Egyptians get their act together again, they conquer the Hyksos and drive the rulers out of Egypt and enslave the other people. And that's likely how the Israelites became slaves of the Egyptians, because they were allied with the hated Hyksos that the Egyptians kicked out and then conquered their servants.
We're working with Jimmy through objections to the biblical account of the Exodus. These questions come from Lawton, and I am enjoying this. So we are just going to work our way through the rest of Lawton's objections that he read about to the Exodus. Jimmy Akin is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. It's an open forum, both hours today, but it's an internet open forum. All of these questions have come to us via the internet. Right back after this. Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and He desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of His will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
That Sarah is all right. A little bit of groovy music for Jimmy Akin for an internet open forum. For an internet open forum, we got the groovy music. Thank you, Sarah. Jimmy, this is fascinating to me, so I want to continue with Lawton's series of questions and their objections to the Exodus, to the biblical account of how the Hebrew people left Egypt. And we worked our way through several of the objections. We were on Egyptians were not big on slaves, and you had just said, yeah, they were. So was there anything else you wanted to add to that, or shall we move on?
Not on that point.
Okay. All right. So the next objection is military forts would have littered the path that they took. I assume this would mean, okay, so that they would have been just taken slaves again by these military forts.
That's the idea. Now, it's true that if you go along the northern route from where the Israelites were, and if you think about the shape of the Mediterranean Sea and Egypt, we know that the Israelites were living in the northern part of Egypt where the Nile fans out and becomes this very fertile area known as the Nile Delta. That's where they were living. And so they're already very close to the Mediterranean Sea. And there were a string of forts that the Egyptians had along that road that runs next to the border of the Mediterranean Sea heading towards Canaan. And so so there are a few things to note here. The first one is, and this is what's called the northern route to get there, but you don't have to go by the northern route. You don't have to hug the Mediterranean Sea as you're making your way there, because you can go further south via a southern route in the Sinai Peninsula and also get there. Well, it so happens that in Exodus, the children of Israel are told, don't go by the northern route, which is where the forts are. And they're specifically told, don't go by the northern route lest they see war and turn back. So that would suggest that, okay, lest they encounter military resistance at those forts and get discouraged and come back. So there's one solution. Another solution is that if the Egyptians have just been hit with a number of plagues and were later in the reign of Ramesses II, when their ability to project power is diminishing, those forts may be understaffed. And so if you have a few dozen guys at a fort, or even a few hundred, and thousands of Israelites are coming by, the fort may not make a big difference.
Yeah, right.
And so, because even 200 guys with, bows and arrows and swords and chariots is not going to be a match for 20,000 Israelites. And so, there's not as much to fear there as you might think. So there are multiple possible solutions to this. And in fact, we have some evidence that they spent a lot of time wandering in the Sinai Peninsula, but those forts were only in the northern part. They weren't all through the peninsula.
Okay, so the next objection, the Exodus story is, I guess what he's saying, it reflects the stories of Akhenaten and Sargon. So I assume there's an earlier story that sounds like this might be a copy of it. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, so we should talk about who these guys are. So Akhenaten was famous as the heretic pharaoh of Egypt. He initially believed in all of the Egyptian gods, just, like he was raised to. But then he became obsessed with one particular god known as the Aten. Aten was a solar deity that is symbolized by the disk of the sun. He's different than other solar deities like Amun-Ra and so forth. So he became obsessed with the sun disk, with the Aten, and he initially mandated that, okay, everybody's going to worship the Aten now. And then he went further and he said, and we're not going to worship any of the other gods anymore. And we're going to start chipping their names off of the temples and things like that. And he set up his own capital in the desert at a place called Amarna. And he lived this kind of hippie lifestyle there where he was into the Aten and leading his religious ceremonies, but not into doing his job of conquering other people and taking their stuff.
This is a theme. I see this theme.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do if you're Pharaoh.
Yeah, they're like the Goa'uld on Stargate.
Okay.
And so after he died, his son Tutankhaten restored the original religion and became known as Tutankhamun. So he changed the Aten in his name back to a traditional different god, Amun. And so he's King Tut.
Funky Tut.
And yeah, now because born in Arizona, moved to Babylonia.
Yeah, I know his background. Yeah.
Yeah. So because Akhenaten, his father, was either a monotheist or something close to being a monotheist, people have said, that may have some relationship with Moses being a monotheist or something like a monotheist. Okay. And in fact, like Sigmund Freud even wrote a book about this on Moses and monotheism and talked about Akhenaten, and other people have talked about it too. Here's the deal. So what? Even if Akhenaten was a full monotheist, how does that stop God from revealing himself to Moses? Or even if you didn't believe in God, if one guy has the idea of monotheism, well, all humans have brains. Someone else could come up with the same idea.
Yeah.
So merely because you got a couple of monotheists in this general time period doesn't mean that one is dependent on the other. In fact, depending on the timing, if you wanted to argue it, I mean, if you wanted to say that Moses was before Akhenaten, you could say, well, maybe Akhenaten got the idea from Moses, though actually the chronology tends to point in the other direction. Then we have Sargon. So Sargon was a king in a completely different culture. Sargon was a king in Mesopotamia, which is, so you think like modern Iraq.
Yeah.
That's where he was. And the connection to Sargon is that there is a legend that when Sargon was a baby, he got put in a basket and floated on a river.
Okay.
Okay. Now that sounds like what happened to Moses.
Yes.
Okay. So, this may, how do we explain this? Well, it could be coincidence. It also could have been a custom. You know, like we have a custom, or have until recently in our own culture, of putting babies in baskets and leaving them on doorsteps if you can't take care of them. And I mean, you see that all the time in like 19th century fiction. People find a baby on their doorstep in a basket. That was one way you dealt with babies you couldn't keep back then, before modern adoption agencies. And so, well, we're clearly well before modern adoption agencies in Sargon's time and in Moses's time. So maybe this was just a custom that they used back then, in which case there's no reason to doubt its historicity. But let's suppose that you do. Let's suppose the story of the Exodus as we have it in Scripture does incorporate some elements that are inspired by Akhenaten or by Sargon. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm just granting this for purposes of argument to the skeptic. How does that challenge the idea that the Exodus occurred? Even if you doubt some details of the story, that doesn't mean the core of the story is wrong. People can get details of historical events wrong, like, eyewitnesses, let's say, of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Some people think John Wilkes Booth shouted "Sic Semper Tyrannis" when he landed on the stage. Other people thought he shouted something else. But that doesn't change the core of the story, that Abraham Lincoln got shot and then died.
Right.
And in the same way, particular details of the Exodus account don't, even if you reject a particular detail, that doesn't disprove the whole thing. And we actually do have good evidence for the Exodus as an event in general.
Okay, so that brings us to our very last objection from Lawton. Objection to that Lawton is not making these. He read these and he wants Jimmy to respond to them. They are objections to the biblical account of the Exodus. The last one is, there are no records of a mass exodus.
So there are a couple of things we need to talk about here. The first one is what's meant by a mass exodus. Now, the Hebrew text, this is in the book of Numbers, it talks about the number of Israelites who came out of Egypt. In fact, that's the reason the book of Numbers is called Numbers, because at the beginning and the end of the book, they take a census, a military census, and identify how many men are there that are 20 or older that could fight on behalf of Israel. And so you've got this beginning numbering and this ending numbering. And the numbers are slightly different, but because they occur at different points in time. But basically, they say that there were 600 alapim. And the question is, plus change. There were 600 alapim of Israelite men 20 and over. And the question is, what is an alapim? Well, the term has more than one meaning. One of its meanings is 1,000. So this would, if that's the meaning that's correct, it would be 600,000 Israelite men. And you'd need to multiply that by, say, 3 or maybe 4 to get the total number of Israelites, including women and children and so forth.
A huge
and
number
that would,
of people.
Yeah, that's going on 2 million.
Yeah.
And the entire population of Egypt at this time was thought to be 3 million.
Yeah.
So if the interpretation 1,000 is right, wow, that's really not That's really significant, and it's not very plausible that that's the size.
Right.
But Alapim has more than one meaning. Alapim can also mean fighting units, or clans, or platoons, or things like that. And even skeptical scholars today, people who don't really take the biblical text seriously, acknowledge that, Alapim means these other things. So the Exodus account in Numbers, or the censuses in Numbers, may only be indicating they had 600 platoons.
Yeah.
Or something like that, in which case there may have just been a few thousand Israelites coming out. Now, so that deals with kind of the mass Exodus part. It may not have been anywhere near as massive as you might think. But what about records? Well, okay, would we even expect there to be an Egyptian record of this? And the answer is no, because the Egyptians didn't. I mean, there may have been one like in a day book somewhere written on papyrus that then disintegrated. And that would have especially happened because of where they were leaving from. They were leaving from the delta region of the Nile, which is very wet. And as a result, we have very little writing from the delta region. When they find scrolls and stuff, it's way south of there where it's much more dry.
Yeah.
So other than being written on like a day book or a letter or something on a scroll, where else would we find it? Well, we could find it written on a monument. But the thing about monuments are the Egyptians don't record defeats on them, because the purpose of a monument is to enshrine your successes. And in particular, on their religious monuments, it's to thank the gods for giving you these successes. And so they don't record their defeats. They only record it when they win.
Right.
And sometimes we can tell that they're actually losing because they keep winning battles, but the battles are getting closer and closer to home. So you can tell they're actually retreating.
Yeah.
Well, if you have a situation like the Exodus where you lose control of a bunch of your slaves and they head out,
right,
that's not something you're going to be thanking the gods for on your monuments. So we wouldn't expect to find a record of it on Egyptian monuments. However, we do find that on the Merneptah stela, a record of a victory that Merneptah had in battle with the Israelites later on, when they were still apparently an unsettled people.
Yeah.
So that is an Egyptian record of something that looks like the Exodus. And then there's the fact, the Old Testament itself is a record.
Yeah.
Why are you dismissing the Old Testament as containing information of historical value? You can't just do that. This is not a guilty until proven innocent thing. If you're going to be fair and objective about ancient documents, be fair and objective about ancient documents. Even if you're not religious, you need to say with any given document of the ancient period, okay, what in this is likely historically reliable? And the idea that we used to be a bunch of slaves, and then we got away because our God helped us out, that's historically credible. Because if you're making up an origin story for your people, you're not going to say, we used to be a bunch of insignificant slaves until we escaped. That's a humiliating national epic, not a glorious national epic. And so treating this as you would any other historical document, we've got evidence for the Exodus.
That was so fascinating. I am so glad, Lawton, that you asked about that. We have to take a quick break, and this will be the perfect time to do that. It's Internet Open Forum today. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we're answering the Internet's questions. We will get back to that as soon as we are done with this break. But before we go to the break, David's here, David Matheson, Director of Development here. And I know why you're here. When you come, it's Society 315.
It is indeed, Si. We are once again promoting Society 315. Society 315, it's of course, for those who are not familiar with it, it is our new online monthly donors club. For $10 or more per month. You become a member of Society 315, and the whole premise behind the club is to help you become a better defender of the faith. And then from our perspective, we really want to be as connected as possible to our supporters, to those who want to be a part of our mission, and the society is built around that as well. So when you join the club, you get a society t-shirt. In fact,
I have one. I got one.
Here's the T-shirt right here. Cy Kellett is a member.
He
has a T-shirt.
It's a freakishly good T-shirt too. It's like also,
really
did you
is.
guys know you were getting this? It's so soft, and everybody's like,
You know, we work with a small Catholic fulfillment company here in San Diego, and they said, we're going to get you a great shirt, and we trusted them.
Boy, they did.
And here it is.
Yeah.
Yep, sure enough. So in addition to the shirt, you'll get a Catholic.com car magnet, and what a lot of folks like is the perpetual 20% discount on Catholic Answers product on our shop. It never expires. So as long as you're a member, you can use this code and get 20% off of everything Catholic Answers produces in the shop. There's also ongoing members-only content, which is one more reason why we wanted to make sure to promote the club today. I know Erica mentioned last week that Father David McConey, who a lot of you are familiar with, he's been on the show several times.
Yeah.
He was at our conference 2 years ago. Wonderful professor at St. Louis University. He did a one-day retreat for the Catholic Answers staff last Wednesday. It was fabulous, and for members only, we are providing the video of that. We're going to send you a link, but to get that, we're going to be sending it out here in the next couple of days. You need to join today. If you want to get that retreat, go on retreat with us. It's a condensed version of St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises. Again, it was wonderful. You were there, Cy. We all benefited from it. We want you to benefit as well.
CASociety315.com is where you can go. If you're already a donor, you just join. But you got to.
That's right.
You send us an email, right, and say I want to be a member.
Correct. If you are already a monthly donor of $10 plus, email society315 at catholic.com and just say, hey, I'm already a donor. We'll pull you up and tell us that you want to add society benefits to your existing monthly donation.
Society 315, it's the new club here at Catholic Answers. We're trying to build a whole community of people who are ready to explain and defend their faith. CASociety315.com, or give us the email address again.
Society315 at catholic.com.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Cy.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
He is only one of 4 popes honored as the Great.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Leo I was pope at a time when Roman civilization was being overrun by barbarian armies. He stood as a light in the darkness and even saved the city of Rome from destruction by Attila and the Huns. Leo died in 461.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's an internet open forum. All of our questions today from the internet. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, ready to answer each of these questions. And the next question comes from Asanga, and the question is as follows. In Theravada Buddhism, they say that vanishing both the body, death to dust, and especially the soul, spirit of Atman, is the ultimate deliverance. So you attain nirvana. That is by total deliverance of karma, just like the Buddha did. This is not the Mahayana concept. All other religions and philosophies are primitive, as they think that the Atman is eternal, that the Lord Buddha removed all like disappearing flame. Is Christianity and other religions which have eternal life primitive in that sense? Thanks.
Okay, so Asanga is referring to a couple of different schools of thought in Buddhism that people may not be familiar with. Theravada Buddhism is the original form, and it's not the most common form of Buddhism today. Most Buddhists are Mahayana, and there's another one that's connected with Tibetan Buddhism, and they're actually more common than the historically original form. But the original Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, held that in order to experience true liberation from suffering, you needed to get rid of all desire, and you could do that by using certain principles that he referred to as the Eightfold Path. And this was the goal of his spiritual striving. He didn't care about gods and whether any gods exist. He was agnostic on that question. His chief idea was that as long as we're trapped in this world, in the cycle of reincarnation, we're going to suffer. And so how you get liberated from that is you stop the cycle of reincarnation by stopping the karma that drives you forward into new incarnations where you'll suffer more. And when you are able to do that, when you're able to extinguish all of your karma, you then attain nirvana, which is compared to the blowing out of a flame. And this applies not just to your body, but to your soul or life principle or true self, which is what's known as the Atman. And so now this will be looked at a little bit differently by different kinds of Buddhists, but some Buddhists, including in the Theravada tradition, will look at this and say, you as an individual really don't survive long term. You may survive this life, but you don't survive as a single conscious individual once you hit nirvana and you have the blowing out of all desire. And so even the life principle or soul is not held to be eternal on this view. And so how would we then evaluate the claim that some coming from a Theravada perspective might make about other religions that do believe in an immortal soul by saying they're primitive? Well, primitive is basically an insult word. You can call anyone you want from a religious perspective primitive. You can say any given idea you want is primitive.
Right.
So you can look at people in the West might look at Theravada Buddhism and say, oh, this stuff about the Eightfold Path and reincarnation and stuff, oh, all that's primitive. This is not the highly refined belief system that we have here in the West, where we have elaborate arguments for monotheism and the existence of God and the existence of the eternal soul and stuff. This is all primitive speculation. And so really, primitive is just a silly putty word that anybody can apply to virtually anybody else. Even if they're wrapping themselves in modern stuff like technology, you can always find a way to portray someone you don't like as secretly primitive. Yeah. And so I would say that rather than debating whether an idea is primitive or not is not very helpful, because sometimes it's the primitive stuff that's right. And, just because something is old doesn't mean it's wrong. And just because something is traditional doesn't mean it's wrong. So there are older traditional ideas that, in fact, are more correct than some of the ideas that get entertained later on. So the date at which an idea occurs is not a reliable indicator of its accuracy. What you really want to look at is not whether someone considers an idea primitive or whether an idea is older or newer. It's what's the evidence for the idea? That's the real test. Do we have good evidence for this idea or not? And I would say, as a Christian apologist, we've got really good evidence for the Christian faith. And I prefer not to get into are other people's ideas primitive, because that simply is a term that will add more heat than light. I'd rather talk about the evidence.
Asanga, thank you so much for the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, and it's an internet open forum. All of our questions have come to us one way or another in written form over the internet. We're going to continue that next hour. One of the great advantages of the internet open forum is we tend to get a good collection before we because we save them up over a period of weeks and even months sometimes. A good collection of really interesting questions. I think you will agree that this first hour has shown that. Lots of fascinating questions. Second hour, more fascinating questions coming, and I'm very interested to hear what Jimmy has to say about them. So hang out with us. We are going to continue with Internet Open Forum right here on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Thank you so much for being with us. It's always great to get to spend this time with you. And we're not taking calls this hour. We're doing all of our questions via the internet. We end up with lots of questions that have come into us either, well, the various modes of social media or emails or the various other ways you can contact a person via the internet. And so from time to time, we gather them up. We gather up especially the ones that are best, and we share them with Jimmy Akin, and Jimmy Akin answers them. And otherwise, Jimmy, I was just thinking about our first hour. Like, we're talking about Theravada Buddhism. We don't get calls on that too often. We're talking about, explaining the historicity of the Exodus. We don't get calls on that too often. So it's nice to get to engage with these.
World religions and Egyptology are two of my areas of interest. So,
Yeah. The Egyptology stuff is fascinating, and you just think there's going to be, they discovered a whole town recently. You probably know more about that than I do, but there's big discoveries still going on in Egypt.
Yeah, and that one's kind of been overblown.
Oh, has it?
Yeah, it's actually an extension of a site that we've known about since the 1930s.
Oh,
and so it's not that amazing a discovery. It's also got advertised as Lost Golden City, and there's nothing golden about it. It's not. They didn't find a bunch of golden artifacts. It's not golden colored. It's mud brick, and it's a workers' camp. So it's not even royalty. There's nothing royal about it. And so, but because Egypt has a tourism problem right now.
Yeah, why not sell it? Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is good that we found this extension of this site that we knew about, and archaeologists will be learning things from it, but it's not the most amazingest thing ever.
I see. I gotcha. All right. We're back to the internet then for more questions. John asks this in John chapter 1, verse 49. Nathanael first encounters Jesus, and his first reaction is to say, "Truly, you are the Son of God." What makes this different from Peter's confession, which caused Jesus to declare him the Rock?
I think the difference is the context. It's not the fundamental content of what Nathanael says, because if you keep reading, he not only identifies Jesus as the Son of God, but as the King of Israel, which means the Messiah. And even earlier in John 1, you have the two disciples, Andrew and apparently the beloved disciple, who, I say, hey, we found the Messiah. And so you had an early awareness in John's gospel that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God, and thus the King of Israel is the Messiah. And those are essentially the things that Peter says in Matthew 16, when Jesus says, well, who do the people say that I am? And they give a bunch of options, all of which are wrong. And he says, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter speaks up and says, you are the Christ, so there's the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And there's the other thing that Nathanael says. So I think that Nathanael has recognized the same things that Peter has recognized. And I think that Jesus would say the same thing to part of the same thing to Nathanael that he said to Peter, which is, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. It's the Father who's given him, both Peter and Nathanael, the grace to recognize Jesus as the Messiah and the Son of God, just like he gives that to all Christians. But what the difference is that is the context in which Jesus is operating. This, in John 1, is at the very beginning of his ministry when he's first gathering disciples around him. He hasn't even picked the 12, much less is he at the point of the 12. Even though we have disciples recognizing content that will later session, Jesus isn't at the point of setting up a structure in his church. But then over the course of time, that changes. By the time of Matthew chapter 10, Jesus selects 12 of the disciples to be apostles. And so he has the beginning of a hierarchy in his movement. And then he gives it some time to see how the 12 that he's picked work and what their natural talents are and things like that. And at a certain point, he decides, okay, given how Peter is functioning, he's the natural leader. And so he appoints the leader in Matthew 16.
Gotcha. Okay. So Nathaniel is just a much, much earlier stage in the whole ministry when Nathaniel encounters Jesus. But Robert has a follow-up question to, or at least a related question. So we'll follow it up to John's question. And this also has to do with Nathaniel. What was the significance of Jesus seeing Nathaniel under the fig tree? Was it somewhere no one could possibly have seen him, thereby proving that Jesus must be God?
I don't think that it's necessarily that nobody could see Nathaniel. I think it's that Jesus could not have humanly, by ordinary vision, seen Nathaniel under a fig tree. I mean, maybe Nathaniel had other people who were there with him. Maybe they were sitting under the fig tree with him too. And so maybe they could have seen Nathaniel, but Jesus was not physically present. And so as a result, by natural sight, Jesus would not have been able to see Nathaniel under the fig tree. And the fact he did see Nathaniel under the fig tree indicates that he has more going on than what ordinary people do. And thus, it counts as evidence for his supernatural, paranormal abilities, which ultimately recognized as, oh, he's God incarnate. But that may not have been clear at the beginning. It could also have been, well, maybe he's a prophet, like when he displays preternatural knowledge of the woman at the well in John 4. But the fact Jesus can do extraordinary things counts as evidence that he's somebody extraordinary.
All right. Thank you very much for the questions, both Robert and John. Appreciate that. I'm actually going to take a quick break right now. We got a little bit of sound issue we're going to straighten out, and so we'll take the break just a couple minutes early. Before we go to that break, I want you to avail yourself of the opportunity of getting a free ebook if you are so inclined. Over at shop.catholic.com, we try to have a free ebook each month. And right now, it's A Walk Through the Bible, free for you in the ebook format at shop.catholic.com.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connection's set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connection's website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Prayer has been so powerful in my communication with God, understanding the church better, most importantly, understanding the Lord better, and myself better. I heard it said once that God answers Knee-mail, as in Knee. Prayer is powerful. One of the favorite things I love to do when it comes to prayer is to ask for the intercession of the great saints. Try it sometime. You'll be very, very impressed and surprised by the amazing power of prayer.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of The Bible is a Catholic Book. He's the author of A Daily Defense, a great book for just getting short bits of very clear apologetics of the Catholic Church. A Daily Defense, 365 days plus one to becoming a better apologist. Jimmy gives you the objection, and then in a few paragraphs explains to you how Catholics respond to that objection. The author of many other books, as well as being our senior apologist here and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Today, not taking calls for Jimmy, but taking our questions from the internet. Lots of folks write to us from all around the world, and this is our opportunity to respond to those things, not just by a personal response to the person, but by addressing their question on the air. So won't be giving out the phone number, but lots of great questions ahead, I can assure you. Up next for Jimmy, Kathy's question. Kathy asks, what about us fringe Catholics who came to the faith late? Our marriages and family life are not Catholic, but I can't fix it. What do you say to Kathy, Jimmy?
Well, God understands. God knows the situation that you're in. If let's say you're married to someone who's not a Catholic and your children aren't Catholic, he knows that you can only do so much, and he has compassion and understanding for your situation, just like he did the very first Christians, because they were in that situation. The people that St. Paul wrote to, whether they were Jewish or whether they were Gentile, they came to the faith late in life, so to speak. They frequently had non-Christian spouses. Their spouses were often pagan. Sometimes their children were not Christian as well. And so this is a situation that God knows about and cares about. He wants us to do what we can to evangelize our families, and that does not mean shoving the gospel down their throats. In fact, Saint Peter and Saint Paul urge wives in particular to be careful about how they evangelize their husbands, and to even use their behavior as a way of winning the souls of their husbands to the faith, rather than arguing with them about the faith. Similarly, one can teach one's children about the faith, but how much one can do that is going to depend on the age of the children and the attitudes of the children, and what the attitude one's spouse has towards teaching the children about the faith. And so it's a complex situation, but God has compassion for this, and he only asks us to do what we can and not what we can't.
Kathy, I hope that's helpful to you, and I'm very grateful that you asked the question, because many, many people find themselves in that situation. You should not feel at all alone, and I hope that was helpful to you, and I hope you'll contact us again if there are more issues you'd like me to address. It's Internet Open Forum this hour. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and I believe you are going to have to help me with this question, because I don't know what it means, Jimmy. Here's what Warren asks. Say there is an I don't even know how to read this. Say there is an impending Teotwaki event. Could a bishop quickly ordain otherwise qualified laymen?
The end of the world as we know it.
Oh, the end of the world as we know it. Teotwaki. Got it. Okay, so I'm going to try that again. Say there is an impending the end of the world as we know it event. Could a bishop quickly ordain otherwise qualified laymen as priests to assure the continuity of the church?
Yes, absolutely. You don't have to, in principle, you don't have to have any special training to be a priest. Now, you want to have training to be a priest, and you want to be trained very well. But in an emergency circumstance, just like it's possible to baptize a person with minimal instruction, it's also possible to ordain a person with minimal instruction. And so if in an end of the world as we know it type situation, a bishop could indeed take the best laymen he can find and ordain them as priests or even bishops.
I would think when people write to you, they probably assume that you would know what Teotwaki means, but I don't think they would assume that. Do people just write to you in shorthand like that because they just figure Jimmy Akin, he's going to know?
Well, frequently they do. That's one of the longer acronyms that I run across, and sometimes I have to look acronyms up, but that one I could figure it out based on the word event.
Oh, I see. I gotcha. All right. Back to the internet questions. Patty asks, what makes a mass invalid?
Okay, so invalid is not a category that pertains to the mass as a whole. The category that pertains to the mass as a whole is not validity, but licity. Something is licit if it's done in accordance with the law, and it's illicit if it's done in some way other than what the law says. So masses can be licit or illicit, meaning you either follow what the law says or you don't in doing them. But the mass as a whole is not valid or invalid. What is invalid or valid within the mass is the consecration of the Eucharistic elements. So the things that you need to have for a valid consecration of the Eucharist are the same as for any other sacrament. You need the proper form, the proper matter, and the proper intent. And the proper form is the words of consecration, where the priest communicates this is my body and this is my blood, even if he varies a little bit from the prescribed formulas, that would make it illicit if he's deviating from the prescribed formulas. But as long as he gets out, this is my body and this is my blood, it's going to be valid. The proper matter is is wheat bread and grape wine. So if you've got wheat bread and grape wine, you have the proper matter. Again, if you have some variation here, like let's say the bread is leavened, that would not be in accord with the law in the Latin rite of the church to use leavened bread, but it would still be valid. And in fact, in many Eastern rites of the church, they do use leavened bread. So having leaven in the bread wouldn't make it invalid, but it would make it illicit in the Latin rite. Finally, you need the proper intent, which is to do what the church does, to perform the Eucharist. And as long as those minimal conditions are met, this is my body, this is my blood, grape wine and wheat bread, and I'm performing the Eucharist, not staging it or something like that, for a stage production, you're going to have a valid consecration within the Mass.
All right. Thank you very, very much for that question. Wait, now who was that? That was Patty. Patty, thank you very much. Appreciate the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and lots of internet questions for Jimmy today on Internet Open Forum. Jacqueline asks this, Jimmy. I've been watching the series The Chosen, and I love it. There is a scene where Jesus changes the water to wine at the wedding. He tells his mother that it's not my time yet, then honors her request to change the water into wine. Should that wine be like the wine at the Last Supper? Was it his blood?
Well, I think that given the way John's gospel works, he's supplementing other gospels that he knows are already out there. That's clearly the case for Mark. I think it's also the case for Luke. Matthew, it's a little more debatable. But he's clearly supplementing what he knows is in the other Gospels. And so he knows about the institution of the Eucharist at the Last Supper. He himself does not mention that. He does have an account of the Last Supper, but he doesn't go into the institution of the Eucharist because he knows that's in the other Gospels. And in light of that, I think that any miracle that Jesus does in John's Gospel that involves wine and transforming it into something, or being transformed into wine, I think he means us, that John the author means us to understand this as in somewhat related to the Eucharist. So I think that for John, this is a foreshadowing of the Eucharistic miracle. It shows that Christ has the power to transform one substance into another, and the fact that he's doing it with wine points forward to the Eucharist, where he will transform the wine into his own blood. We also have a similar discussion in John 6 about Jesus being the bread of life and his flesh being bread, that also foreshadows the Eucharist and the transformation of bread into his literal flesh. So I think we have Eucharistic foreshadowing going on both in John 2 at the wedding of Cana, in John 6 in the bread of life discourse, but I don't think in either case that we have exactly the same miracle. In John 6, for example, he's just fed the 5,000. He's just multiplied the loaves and the fishes. But on that occasion, even though it foreshadowed the Eucharistic miracle, it's not the same as the Eucharistic miracle. He doesn't turn, in multiplying the bread and the fish, he doesn't turn them into his own body and blood. So it may relate to the Eucharist, but it's not the same miracle. And in the same way, in John 2, at the wedding at Cana, the miracle is not the same. He's not turning wine into his blood. He's turning water into wine. And so once again, I think that even though it foreshadows the Eucharist, we shouldn't understand it as exactly the same miracle.
Jacqueline, thank you. Appreciate that question. It's an Internet Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. All of our questions have come from the internet today, and Dan's question is up next. Dan asked this, Jimmy, what is an effective way To reach those who believe the end justifies any means, or that one person's desires trump another's. For example, some believe that abortion is killing a human being, but it should be allowed anyway, or that looting and rioting is okay for the disenfranchised.
I think that the ultimate solution in all cases of this sort is to encourage people one way or another to think about the golden rule, to put themselves in the position of those who are being affected by the desires in question and say, would I want this to happen to me? Like, for example, in the case of looting, put yourself in the position of the store owners that are being looted. They've built up businesses. They have limited margins to make money. They have to pay their employees. They have to make a living themselves. Is smashing up their shops and taking their stuff something that you would want to happen to you if you were a business leader or an employee of one of these stores? Similarly, in the case of something like abortion, put yourself in the position of the unborn child. Would you want to be aborted, or would you rather grow up and have the chance to live and experience life and make the same kind of choices that everybody else gets to make in life? The real solution to those, now this point can be made in different ways. Sometimes it can be made in a gentle way. Other times it can be made in a way that's a little bit sharper. Usually the gentle way, giving it a loving presentation as something that people want to aspire to. We want to aspire to treating others like we want to be treated. That's a universal standard of fairness that's recognized across religions and across moral systems, that we should treat others, even if you're not Christian. We all recognize we should treat others the way we want to be treated. And regardless of the way you make that point, I think that encouraging people to follow the golden rule is the key to sorting out these situations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the question, Dan. It's an internet. Well, we are just moving through questions, Jimmy. And so I'm going to, before we have to go to the bottom of the hour break, we'll take Jason's question. Is it egotistical to see something like autism not as a disability, but as a blessing? I do not know whether Jason himself has autism, but that seemed like that might be what he's asking.
So different people have different abilities and different disabilities that they have to deal with. Autism is one that some people have. Autism is a neurological difference that some people, it can have effects like many other things. Among the more challenging aspects of autism are there can be a difficulty in relating to other people and communicating with them verbally. On the other hand, people with autism can be very focused on details and very detail-oriented and precise in what they do. And so it's a trade-off. There are benefits and there are detriments to it, like many other conditions. You even see this in literature, like Sherlock Holmes is clearly bipolar, but he uses that to his advantage as a detective. In the series Monk is clearly very heavily OCD, but he uses that to his advantage as a detective. And in the same way, people with autism can use aspects of it to their advantage. I recently saw a video on YouTube from a gentleman who Science and Technology channel I sometimes see. And he did a video called Autism is My Superpower, where he talked about both the benefits and some of the challenges of having autism. And so I don't see it as automatically egotistical because there are these good aspects, but we also want to have a realistic understanding of some of the challenges that are involved too. And so Jason, you might want to, for you or a friend, you might want to check out that video on YouTube, Autism is My Superpower.
Thanks, Jason. I really appreciate that question. Even something that is not, you wouldn't say is a good, all kinds of suffering can be a blessing in that we might come to an insight we didn't have. We might be shared a grace, that God's grace helps us get through it. All of these are good as well. All right, I'm not exactly sure what happened with the sound, but Jason, I'm really very glad for your question. I'm grateful to everybody for their questions. We got a whole bunch more internet questions for Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. So hang on just a couple minutes. We'll take a very, very quick break, and when we come back, more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. And don't forget, we got that free ebook for you, A Walk Through the Bible. Free in the ebook form right now at shop.catholic.com.
We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
According to divine command, we should give God worship, but how do we know if we're doing it right? Is worship a form of self-help? To make me feel better? A form of social activism, or even a commodity? Or is it something that transcends all of those? In Real Religion, How to Avoid False Faith and Worship God in Spirit and Truth, Father Jeff Kirby cuts through the misguided modern notions about God and religion and takes you back to the foundation for true worship, God's revelation about himself. From his first contact with his chosen people to the culmination of his revelation in Jesus Christ, God shows us what religion is supposed to be like and how to make the practice of it a lifelong virtue in our lives. Order your copy of Real Religion by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Really, Sarah? You're just trying to be popular now. 2 times with the groovy music. All right, you're popular with me. I find you very popular now. Thank you for playing the groovy music again. It's Internet Open Forum today with Jimmy Akin. All of our questions have come via the internet. No sound problems at all with that music. That sounded nice and clear and crisp. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm not going to be giving out the phone number. Just enjoy the questions, because actually when we get to gather them up from the internet, we get to collect some of the more interesting questions. So it provides an opportunity, I think, for present a little bit more of a challenge to Jimmy in a very interesting couple hours. So Internet Open Forum today. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, is our guest. And this next comes from Donna. And I know Donna. She's a good friend from Facebook. She's been to our conferences, so I've seen her here and there. And it's nice to get a question from you, Donna. Do you see the church growing? Oh, excuse me. Do you see the church going underground soon? That's for you, Jimmy.
Well, it depends on where you're talking about. The church is underground in some places. There are parts of the world where the church is not able to operate fully above ground because of persecution by the local authorities. And it's unfortunate, but in many parts of the world, not in all of them, there is a growing hostility towards the Christian religion and towards the Catholic Church. And so I anticipate that there will be additional places where the church will have to shift at least part of its operations to a realm that's not fully in the public eye. Now, even during the original age of persecutions, there was a knowledge out in the public that Christians existed and that they were doing their thing, but they were keeping it largely private and trying to stay under the radar. I would anticipate the same thing would happen in various places in the future. Fortunately, this isn't happening everywhere, but there is a concern that it's becoming more widespread, and Christians are having to be more on the down low about some aspects of faith and practice. It's a very worrying thing. Fortunately, here in the United States, we have the First Amendment, which is meant to guarantee religious freedom. How consistently that will be interpreted and enforced is an open question for the future. And so I think it's very important for Catholics and other Christians and other people of other religions to be very active in the public sphere in ensuring that we continue to have religious protections that the courts will actually enforce.
Amen to that, brother. Donna, thank you very, very much for the question, and thank you for all the time. Well, just thanks for being our friend here at Catholic Answers. David asks this question, Jimmy. Why does Scripture and other public revelation end with the death of the last apostle, considering that, 1, some of the New Testament is not authored by an apostle, and 2, additional apostles can be appointed by Christ, much as Paul was appointed by Christ after his ascension? What do you say to that, Jimmy?
The answer is that it's purely a matter of God's choice. As you point out, God could have Scripture, which forms part of public revelation, written by non-apostles, and he could continue to appoint additional apostles like Christ appointed Paul. So the fact he chose not to do those two things is a matter of his choice. Now, we can speculate on the reason for that. I would speculate that he had already completed, that it was fitting for him to end public revelation at that point because he'd already said what he wanted to say for the Christian age. There wasn't any new public revelation that we would need prior to the second coming. And so, well, he'd said what he meant to say, and therefore he didn't need to say any more. He didn't need to keep appointing apostles or keep giving public revelation. I think that's the fundamental reason, but it's a matter of speculation.
Thanks, David. Thank you for the question. Up next, one from Tom. And this is a very concise question, I got to say, Jimmy. Do lockdowns actually work?
It's going to depend on a number of factors, including what kind of lockdown you're talking about. There is a wide range of different kinds of lockdowns. Some of them are extreme, like nobody gets to go outside of their homes at all. Others allow for a lot more flexibility, where people get to go out, but they need to be socially distanced or wear masks or all kinds of other things. There's not a single model of what a lockdown looks like. Then you have to evaluate another term in the question, which is work. What do you mean by work? If you mean prevent the transmission of COVID or some other, pathogen in society, well, yeah, if you have a severe enough lockdown, it will contain the spread of COVID or some other pathogen. I mean, people might get it in a single household, but if they're locked in their household and can't go out at all, they're not going to be spreading it to other households. So there is a form of lockdown that is so severe that, yeah, it would work to contain the spread of a particular pathogen. But what's the cost of that? If you don't let people go out of their homes, period, how do they get food? And how do they get medical care? And are they going to go crazy? And are they going to suffer mental illness or other physical illnesses? And so there is a cost-benefit calculus that has to be done. And I think because of how the COVID debate got politicized in American society, and because of how risk intolerant many people are today compared to the past, that there wasn't enough thought put into this question. You had an initial 2 weeks to flatten the curve that then turned into months and months and months of lockdown, and the science really hasn't hasn't been clear that the type of lockdowns that were used either worked to contain the spread of the virus, or that they didn't have hidden costs that were counterbalancing the utility they had with regard to COVID. I think it's a complex question. It's one that there needed to be a lot more public debate about, and we really didn't have that. So I think that given the lack of clarity in this situation, we'll have to kind of look at it in hindsight and see what judgments can be made at a later date.
Tom, thanks very much for the question. Appreciate it. We didn't really have the political debate, but I wonder, Jimmy, if in coming weeks and months and years there will be, enough scientific studies done where we'll start to get a clear picture of what worked, what didn't work, and we can have that debate, because this might happen again.
Oh, it's certain to happen again at some point, and I think it's important that we learn the lessons from this time to the extent we can and try to get past all the political partisanship and take an objective look at the science and what we learned. That's one reason I'm glad Sweden didn't follow the same kind of lockdown as everybody else, because it provides another data point about what happens if you do something different.
Right, right, and there's going to be I'm sure there'll be 100 PhDs, theses, I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to say it, written over in the next couple decades that have theses that have some take a look at some different aspect of this pandemic, because certainly some stuff went right. A lot of stuff also went wrong in the way we did it. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
I feel that God has been really doing a work in me in the last 5-10 years. I'm a convert to Catholicism, and I started to just really feel a passion to know more about the Catholic faith, and I started listening to Catholic radio all day. I'm not doing great things, but I'm doing small things with great love.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
A lot of people think that street evangelization involves yelling out of a bullhorn telling people that they're going to hell. Not so with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Our methods are non-confrontational and effective. We simply offer information on the Catholic faith, along with rosaries, miraculous medals, and prayer. Pope Francis wrote about how beautiful it is to see street preachers joyfully bringing Jesus to every corner of the earth. Street evangelization is fun and fruitful. Join us today at streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Internet Open Forum. Having fun with Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. Lots and lots of internet questions come to us. Gather them up every now and then and try to work our way through the mailbag. Jimmy is gracious enough to do that with us from time to time. Tomorrow, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World will be about a secret government program in the 1960s that tried to get us into a war with Cuba. I don't remember the name of it, Jimmy, but I think I gave the right summary. Did I sum it up right?
You did, and it was called Operation Northwoods.
Of course, Operation Northwoods. You always try to give it a nice, Irenic-sounding name. You don't want to call it Operation Fake Terrorism to get us into a war with Cuba. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, the Joint Chiefs of Staffs obviously had a sense of marketing.
Yeah, right. You want to market your plots correctly. All right, I got another question from another Tom. A question from another Tom. This Tom asks, would a DNA test confirm that Joseph was Jesus' father?
Well, in fact, Joseph was not Jesus' father, so regardless of what a DNA test showed, it wouldn't confirm that he was his father. Now, you could, since we don't know exactly what Joseph's DNA was, and we don't know exactly what Jesus's DNA was, there could be a range of outcomes, hypothetically speaking, to such a test. We know that Jesus inherited DNA from Mary in modern terms because she was his biological mother, but women don't carry a Y chromosome, and you need a Y chromosome to be a man. So somewhere, God came up with additional genetic material that he added to Mary's in order to give Jesus a full set of human chromosomes. That could have been as little as a single Y chromosome, or it could have been a whole set of 23 additional chromosomes in addition to the 23 that Jesus would have inherited from Mary. So what would those 23, let's suppose it was a full set, what would those 23 have looked like? Could they have been identical to the genetic matter that would show up on a DNA test of Joseph? Well, hypothetically, they could. God could create 23 new chromosomes from nothing and add them to Mary's, and they could look identical to Joseph's chromosomes. But that would defeat the purpose of having Jesus not have a human father. If you then give Jesus DNA that looks exactly like the DNA of his foster father, if you had a test like this, it would make it look like he is the biological son of Joseph, and that defeats the whole point. So I would suspect that if we had Joseph's DNA and if we had Jesus's DNA and we could compare them, they would not look identical.
All right, Tom, thanks very much for the question. Next one comes from Deacon Harvey. What's up with Psalm 110? Why do different Bibles have somewhat different versions?
The reason is that the Psalms are numbered differently in different editions of the Bible. The Masoretic text is the version that is used by Jewish people, and it's the most common one today in English Bibles for the numbering of the Psalms. But the Septuagint has a slightly different numbering, where some Psalms get joined together or split up a little bit differently. They both come out, both the Septuagint version and the Masoretic text have 150 Psalms, but they're combined and separated in slightly different ways. And as a result, you see the numbers getting out of alignment and coming back into alignment and getting back out of alignment again at different points in the book of Psalms. So if you ever look up a reference to a psalm and you see something that is not what you're expecting, look at the psalm immediately before or immediately after it, because the variations will be like one off from the number you're expecting. So just look at the next psalm before or after, and you'll find what you're looking for.
Thank you, Deacon Harvey. Appreciate the question. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Internet Open Forum. And Patrick asks this, Jimmy, have you heard of the theory that the Last Supper was on a Tuesday because Jesus and the apostles went along with an older calendar like the Essenes surely did? And that way, it reconciled John's Passover of the Jews as distinct from it. According to this, Jesus would still be crucified on Friday, but it would reconcile some New Testament difficulties like all the trials, and not to mention the synoptic versus John's account.
There are a number of theories along these lines, and I have encountered one that talks about the Last Supper occurring on a Tuesday. Pope Benedict actually explores this in Volume 2 of his Jesus of Nazareth series. I don't know that he's exploring exactly the version that you're thinking of, though, which has the Last Supper on a or Passover on a Tuesday and then Jesus being crucified on a Friday. I don't see how that would solve the issue that people raise with Johannine chronology, because if he's crucified on Friday, then the Jewish authorities, according to John's Gospel, are still waiting to eat the Passover on that Friday. And if Passover was Tuesday, I guess I can see how this could explain some of those things. The more common theory along these lines that I've seen is that he was crucified on Wednesday, and that allows additional days to happen before he's raised on either Saturday night or Sunday morning. And people propose that as a way of trying to explain the statement that he'll be buried for 3 days and 3 nights. Actually, I'm not a fan of any of these theories. I think the traditional dating of Passover being on Thursday and the crucifixion being on Friday and the resurrection early Sunday morning is the correct chronology. I think that the 3 days and 3 nights is accounted for by the fact that back then part of a day or night got counted as a whole one. So if he's buried for part of Friday, all of Saturday, and part of Sunday, that will be spoken of as 3 days and 3 nights in the Jewish idiom. And I think that the reason that the Jewish authorities had not yet eaten Passover on Friday morning is because they stayed up all night waiting for Jesus to be delivered to them and then putting him on trial. They hadn't had time to eat it yet.
Patrick, thank you very much for the question. Jimmy Akin, our guest, Internet Open Forum. Jeff asks this: do you think God's original plan for Moses was for him to just become Pharaoh through succession and then have Moses and his army escort his people into the promised land? But Moses messed up and murdered an Egyptian, and so God had to find another way.
So this is an interesting question that also involves Egyptology like we had in the last hour. One could propose this, and it's an interesting idea to think about, but I don't think it's very likely because of how Egyptian courts worked, royal courts, I mean. Moses, even though he was adopted and raised by Pharaoh's daughter, he was still recognized as being a Hebrew, as being a foreigner. That's how. So he knew about his own people. That's why he ends up defending the guy and murdering the guy who was attacking a fellow Hebrew. And it's unlikely that the native Egyptians would have allowed a Hebrew, even an adopted Hebrew, to become Pharaoh. Also, how you became Pharaoh didn't depend strictly on what kind of a son you were. It appears from various things that Egyptologists have learned that what was actually more important was who you married. That the person who became Pharaoh was the one who married the woman with the most pure royal blood. And so hypothetically, if Moses could have married the highest ranking Egyptian woman of the right age with the most royal blood in her veins, well, then maybe he could have become Pharaoh because that's how other people did it. But we don't have any indication that that was the case. Also, older sons tended to inherit rather than younger sons, and we don't have any indication that Moses was counted as Pharaoh's oldest son. He was presumably a younger adopted son and a foreigner, and all of those would be strikes against him becoming Pharaoh. And you may wonder about how does this work with older sons tending to inherit unless they died, with the idea you need to marry the woman with the royal blood? Well, that's why King Tutankhamun married his sister. So they had brother-sister marriages that were incestuous to accommodate both the principle of older sons tending to inherit with the principle that you needed to marry the woman with the royal blood.
All right, Jeff, thank you for that question. I'm just going to keep moving here because we're getting very near the end. I don't want to get everybody's question in if I can, or just at least get as many as I can. And James asks this: is there a formal process to have a patron saint named for a profession? My military occupation deals with chemical defense, and I would like to have Saint Benedict named as our patron, the way artillerymen have Saint Barbara.
So who gets to be the patron saint of something depends on what you're talking about. If you're baptizing a baby and you give the baby a saint's name, the parents, or whoever names the baby, are establishing one of the patrons for that child. If you have a church that's being built, it's the person who chooses the name of the church, which would presumably be either the bishop or the initial pastor of the church, with the approval of the bishop, who determines the patron saint of that church. If you're talking about the patron saint of a nation, it's the Conference of Bishops that determines that. So it would seem to me that for a profession like chemical defense, it would be Catholic chemical defense workers that would be the ones to propose this. And then in order to give it legal recognition, I would assume you'd talk to the competent military authorities. So if I were in the U.S. Armed Forces and I was doing chemical defense, I might talk to some other chemical defense guys and build some support for having St. Barbara declared as our patron, or St. Benedict, declared as our patron. And then I would talk to the military archdiocese of the United States and say, hey, we have a movement. We'd like St. Benedict to be our patron. Would you consider formally recognizing this?
Thanks, James. Ryan asks this, Jimmy. In chapter 3 in the Gospel of Nicodemus, Jesus being questioned by Pilate is identical to how John's Gospel presents it. But after Pilate asks Jesus what is truth, Jesus replies, truth is from heaven. Pilate says, therefore, truth is not on earth. Depending on the time frame of when this gospel was written, do you think it's likely this shows an accurate portrayal of the conversation Jesus and Pilate have beyond what John's Gospel records?
So I think Ryan has identified the key question, which is the time frame when this was written, because the exact details of conversations are not going to be passed down for multiple generations with any degree of accuracy. If a conversation occurred, 200 years ago, if we don't have a written record of it, we might at best have the gist of what people talked about, but we're not going to have their exact words. And so unless the Gospel of Nicodemus were a first-century gospel, we would not expect it to have exact details of the conversation of Jesus and Pilate. And in fact, the Gospel of Nicodemus is not from the first century. It appears that it may have been composed in the 4th century, in the 300s AD. It may draw on earlier sources, but it doesn't appear that any of those sources are first century ones other than the Gospel of John itself. So it looks like an imaginative embellishment of John's Gospel on this point rather than an independent record of an actual conversation.
Oh, how interesting. So give, in case I missed it, I think I did miss it. You dated the Gospel of Nicodemus then when?
To the 300s AD.
Oh, 300s AD. Okay, so I see. All right, Richard asks this, and I think we have time. Is heaven an actual place, or is it a spiritual relationship with God?
Heaven is definitely a spiritual relationship with God, but it also, at least in its present form, is capable of receiving bodies, because we know of several people who are in heaven that have their bodies with them. That would include Elijah, Mary, and Jesus himself, because he took his body with him when he ascended to heaven. So it may not be a place in our physical universe. It may not be extended in space the way we are, but it's at least capable of receiving a physical body. Of course, as we mentioned earlier in the show today, our ultimate destiny is to live on the new earth, which will be renovated, and we'll have our bodies with us there as well.
So that being the case, if heaven is definitely a spiritual condition, it's also a place that can receive bodies, so it has some spatial reality. When we live on the new earth, the spiritual sense of heaven is still ours. Even if we're not in that physical location of heaven, we're still in heaven. Is that right?
Yes. Spiritually speaking, yes. We will be spiritually united with God in the new earth.
All right, it's good news. I like getting clear answers on these last things. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World will drop tomorrow with each Friday. You get a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. This will be episode 151, probably something like that. That's
right, 151.
Episode 151 tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World about the Northwoods project. Sounds kind of creepy to me, but get it and enjoy it. Jimmy, thank you very much for 2 hours of Internet Open Forum.
My pleasure, Cy.
We'll have to do it again, and we will do it again. So if you are one of those folks who communicates via the various internet forms, if you send us an email or contact us via social media, it's always possible. We'll get to it when we do these. And if you've got a weird question that you specifically want when we do Weird Questions with Jimmy, just send it to us at radio Catholic.com. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.